we are working on the head studs, okay? Now, based on the previous video, you guys would be going, hey, what about the torque plate? Shouldn't you have had the head studs on before you use the torque plate? Well, when we inspected my cylinders, there was no reason to hone them, or not hone them, to bore them, and they didn't require anything more than a simple hone. So when you're doing a simple hone, there's not really all that much benefit to using torque plate. So in this instance, I haven't used it, but that is okay for this for my engine because that didn't happen. Now, if I was taking this from an 86 to an 87 or even an 87.5 millimeter bore, like a larger diameter piston, then you use a torque plate, okay, because you're actually shaving metal out of the cylinder, and you want to make sure that you're doing it round, okay? But when you're just honing, or deglazing, some of you might know it as that, it's not so critical, okay? Because the honing device actually contracts and expands as it goes down the hole, so it actually reports to conforms to the hole rather than requiring to be perfectly round, okay? So that wasn't done. But it's okay because we got an awesome look at the torque plate and we got to take a peek at what it can do and how it's used. So as you'll note, these are head studs, okay? Now head studs are different than head bolts. Now you will have seen these head bolts when you took them out of your block, or if you're not doing that, then you saw them when we did the video on me taking them out. But here's a closer look. Now a head bolt, okay, is roughly the same length as a head stud, but in this case the head stud's a little longer. The other thing is this head stud has this little nipple at the end, and there's actually a spot in the bottom that this slides into. Now why Hyundai didn't include it I don't know, but because Hyundai didn't, and they did use a sealant on the thread, it becomes like a little vapor lock down there, and any moisture or air that's down there, or in my case that horrible sulfur smell, gets baked in there through the heat cycles, and it expands and contracts at a different rate than the metal, because aluminum expands and contracts differently than steel does. So these are the #1 recommended things to get rid of when you're doing your block. Okay, they're not that great. Like they look very similar, but trust me, they're not. The metallurgy involved in this is not all that great. Now, with the head stud, converting to head studs, it has a couple of benefits. One, it's a little bit easier to work on, to be perfectly honest. The other benefit is these ARP ones can be retorqued, like I mentioned earlier. So a Hyundai bolt, when you torque it, you stretch it. It actually stretches a little bit. Well, the ARPs are stronger, so they don't stretch, or if they do stretch, they don't stretch as much. There's actually a guideline to how much you're allowed to let them stretch. So you can't reuse the Hyundai ones because of that stretch. They go what's called plastic. They lose their ability to return to their original shape. Okay. These ARP ones, which are ARP 2000s according to this, so you can look that up, just like the basement bolts. These are a lot stronger. And the reason that it's really important that these are really strong is because when the compression happens in here, okay, so the detonation occurs, all of that force acts on the piston and acts on the head, okay? these bolts hold the head down to prevent the liftoff or decompression of the cylinder during that time. Some people have experienced this, and in my personal opinion, my block was experiencing a little bit of it because I had coolant in my cylinders. So that doesn't necessarily mean that the head gasket's bad, because I looked at my head gasket and my head gasket wasn't actually all that bad. But it could mean that your bolts have gone a little bit plastic, and that's just a side effect of working on it, or the engine doing what the engine's supposed to do, which is convert fuel into happiness. So now, just like the basement bolts, we're going to apply the ARP torque goop, okay? The blue stuff that came in the box, fastener assembly lubricant, okay? And just like the other bolts, we make sure that the threads are completely clean, okay? Because we want the best mating contact surface possible. Okay. And then, according to ARP's guidelines, just like before, they go in by hand, which can be a little tricky. Okay, now that's as far as I can take it by hand. So you want to do this very, very lightly if you're using this. And you'll notice I'm not using the ratchet motion. Now you hear that hissing? Maybe you don't. There's a hissing coming out of here like a little burble. And what that is the air in that little pocket that tab at the end of the bolt goes into. Well, now that the bolt's pushing into there, all that air has to come up. And that's going to come up through the threads. And that's a good thing because we don't want air in there. Now again, at this point, we don't want to torque them down, okay? And for those of you that are wondering what I was doing with the caliper, it's quite simple. I'm making sure that all of the bolts are the same height, okay? And I do that because I want to make sure that the bolts are down, like fully seated. So I'm not spinning the nut on the bolt. The bolt's seated, but it's not torqued, okay? Well, there's a little bit of torque. I mean, I'm sure one of these I could take out with my fingers, but by using the depth of the bolt, or of the port, okay, and the fact that this bolt has that little nub on it, you do some maths and you come up with the distance that this bolt is supposed to be outside of the head to know when it is fully at the bottom, okay? Now I gave a couple of thou of difference in order to not over torque the bolt while I'm putting it down, but you notice that I was able to bring it all down lightly with my fingers. And this is a lot more information than I guess I was intending to give everybody, but I mean, it works. I'm sure somebody will find it useful. But either way, that is the main studs are on. Now, gasket-wise, I don't have my new gasket kit yet, so until the gaskets show up, there won't be all that much more to do, except the next thing, I guess, which will happen hopefully next week. The rotating assembly will be balanced, and I will be able to put the crank and everything back in, and we'll do a video on that. But before we go today, you'll notice that there's some things missing down there, and that is these. Okay, these are called oil squirters. Okay, they are little, I guess, injectors. Okay, because they run on block pressure, and they go down here and they squirt up at the bottom of the piston. Okay, now they are keyed. Okay, and they have a little dowel pin there, and there's a little bump on the block. And that makes sure that they're in the right spot. And then it's got like a little banjo bolt, but this little bolt has a valve in it. Okay, and what happens is when you get into high RPM, okay, your oil pressure increases because we have a chain drive oil pump. Okay, when the oil pressure increases to a certain point, this valve lifts up and allows oil to go through the squirters. Okay, and that means that you're getting proper lubrication at high speed, but you're also maintaining oil pressure, good oil pressure at low speed. Okay, so when your engine's being used the most, you get all the goodies, and when your engine's being used the least, you get better efficiency. So I'm going to put these oil squirters back in, and we will see you guys probably next week.